I went to visit family in Chicago, and I realized that there was a delineation between poor blacks in South and West Chicago, and those who weren't so poor. Um, there's still a physical divider. There's a highway, I think it's Route 90, that divides people so that there are the haves and the have-nots. There is a cycle because there were a lot more cops in those neighborhoods. I remember going to visit my aunt out in Chicago, and I hated being there. I just felt like just being black was going to be something that was going to cause us to experience crime on a higher level than others.
In 2016, Baltimore and Prince George's County have the highest rates for homicide and violent crimes in Maryland. Last year, Baltimore was only second to Chicago regarding the number of homicides. However, it is also one of the poorest cities in the United States. Nearly a quarter of residents in Baltimore live in poverty. Wealthier counties bordering Prince George's County, such as Montgomery and Howard County, have both lower poverty and violent crime rates, implicating a relationship between crime and poverty. High crime rates are often associated with poverty-stricken areas. But what exactly is the relationship between poverty and crime in juveniles?
More of experience with crime at Parkdale. That was our first high school. There was really a lot of violence there, a lot of fights, people bringing weapons to school. It was really scary, very scary environment. Um, when I first came to Roosevelt, I didn't see much crime there until the day of the stabbing, and that was actually at my lunch, and it happened like right in front of me, and it was kind of like a first-hand experience that crime does exist at Roosevelt. It was kind of like a flashback of like what I was seeing very often at Parkdale.
I think we have, as far as crimes are concerned, unfortunately, we're having a spike in marijuana. We have crime, we have weapons that we deal with, as far as knives. Unfortunately, there are some guns that's being found, very minimum amount. Um, and again, it varies from geographics, though.
But I would probably say um, theft, violent crimes, physical nature, at the utmost, death.
2015, in Prince George's County, juveniles made up 29% of those arrested for robbery, 22% of those arrested for rape, and 7% of those arrested for murder.
PGCPS records from 2013 show that teenagers were arrested most often on charges for fighting, physical assault, drug possession, and theft. Teenage crime in this area spans from petty to the most extreme.
Why do teenagers commit crimes? Oftentimes, teenagers living in poverty feel abandoned.
It depends. I guess the catch-all one is to say it's a lack of parenting, but you can't always say that. I do believe it starts from a home. Because if you have a good experience or a good example, more than likely you'll be less prone to maybe embarrass your family by committing such an act.
Then they will seek the guidance outside of home. And that can be in the form of their friends or their so-called friends, their associates, to get the things that they need.
Why do I think they commit crimes? I think anger really. They don't know. There's no, especially in minority homes, there's no outlet for emotions or any mental health outlets. So that's probably the only way they can. They feel like they're letting out their emotions, whether it's anger or pain.
I know I grew up incredibly poor, and we didn't steal. We didn't commit a lot of crimes because we just felt, well, again, it goes back to that discipline. We were taught to appreciate what we had, and that this is wrong. So let's see. Well, I think poverty has an influence on crime, um, but it's not the end all be all. It's not 100% of why people commit crimes. After all, we have rich people people with a lot of money and who are well off who commit crimes. We also have people who were once poor, get money, and still commit crimes. And you have people who are incredibly poor and will never commit a crime. But I think it influences people because it gives an excuse for why they might commit a crime. Because there are times where I'll hear either on a television show, a movie, or even out in the real world, and even in class, well, I took his pencil because I don't have one. I stole this car because I don't have a way to work. So it becomes an excuse, but it's not why people do what they do.
Um, I would say, for the most part, they're reaching out for help. Most teenagers that we have experienced, especially in schools, they want someone to listen. They don't have that outlet or that person for guidance.
As far as weapons and things, I think sometimes it's just a matter of making bad choices, okay, or being under peer pressure.
While poverty does foster very negative conditions, it does not seem to be the main and direct cause of juvenile crime. Family and friends strongly influence a teenager's life. When either of these two turn toxic, the teenager may act out since they have no knowledge of what to do otherwise. A dysfunctional home life can be created in households of high socioeconomic status.
Because people that's not poor commit crimes as well too. I've seen people that come from really financially stable families and they still want to sell drugs. Um,
Eliminating poverty would not rid society of juvenile crime.
Teenagers may commit crimes out of frustration and hopelessness because they have never been taught healthy methods of coping.
As you go lower and lower down through the poverty line, I think you don't get as much benefit. So if you're richer, you can have more access to like psychologists and psychiatrists, and really focus on mental health and things that and those things may come as a necessity to you. But when you are poor, things like mental health aren't your main priority. They're not things that you will pay attention to. So you'll begin to turn your emotions or the things that should be fixed.
Poverty does factor into why teenagers commit crimes, but is one out of many causes. Living in poverty limits what resources and services are accessible. There's educational inequality, fewer recreational activities, and worse living conditions in impoverished areas compared to wealthier ones.
In 1990, $130 million was injected into Sandtown, Winchester, one of the poorest communities in Baltimore. The money went to the education system, health services, and building houses. The project continued for nearly a decade until it lost funding due to declining interest and little to no results. Today, 26% of the community lives in poverty, and the homicide rate is more than double Baltimore's citywide average. Poverty has its own culture in a sense, where the people have developed an alike perspective of the world. People living in poverty adapt to their environment as a means of survival. They may start seeing crime as an everyday, ever-present obstacle rather than an issue that should be addressed.
And so many of us have been living like this for the second and third generation until we don't even know how to change. Despair is a way of living.
People living in poverty adapt to their environment as a means of survival. They may start seeing crime as an everyday, ever-present obstacle rather than an issue that should be addressed. When teenagers start believing that they are not capable of going far in life due to poverty, being arrested for delinquency does not seem like it would dramatically worsen the state of their future. Having a criminal record makes it more difficult to get jobs, and the cycle goes on. This creates an atmosphere of hopelessness that traps its victims in continuous poverty and crime.
And we do see an increase in crime rates for areas with higher poverty levels. However, the causes for crimes are complex. They include parental neglect, low self-esteem, alcohol, drug abuse, and much more. Not everyone in poverty is involved with crimes. Every person reacts differently to their environment, so it is difficult to pinpoint what most influences teenagers to commit crimes.